Welcome back to Two Who's Review. I'm Alex,
And I'm Fitz.
and this week it's the return of the King, I guess, as we examine the recent episode Boom, which is the how many years has it been? 7-year return of Steven Moffat to the writing chair of Doctor Who. Now, if you're unfamiliar, we on this podcast have some mixed feelings about Steven Moffat. I defer my
Yes.
time to Fitz here.
Yes. Mixed in the collective sense, because, yeah, Cuff, you historically have certainly enjoyed his era more than I have. Granted, you've watched more of his era than I have, but the fact that I didn't enjoy some of his era is the reason why I haven't watched as much of it as you have.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's been, various feelings from me. Not all of them positive. I think to sum it up as briefly as I can, at his best, Moffat is brilliant, um, bordering on genius. Really, we've already looked at this with the gas mask zombies episode. We will look at this with Blink and Silence in the Library. But at his less best, I find a lot of his work to be, well, I don't know, maybe not even a lot, but some of his work to be creatively confused, trite, and frustratingly sentimental in a way that interferes with other elements of the storytelling to a degree that I just, after all these years, still does tend to get my goat. Let's put it that way.
I don't think that's unfair to say. I tend to be, like I said, I'm a bit more. I don't want to say lenient, but I don't think I have the same issues with him as a writer as you.
Yeah.
Um,
You're a
I
bit more balanced, and the things that
yeah,
annoy me are fairly, um, maybe not all of them, but some of them are fairly specific to me.
yeah, and I think that I that's not to say that I'm like 100% a fan of the guy as a writer. He's done some things that I find incredibly frustrating.
Oh yeah, no, I
Uh,
know. You've said that there are certain, even certain story arcs and definitely certain episodes where you have, problems with them.
yeah. Um, so that's I think when we were coming into this episode last week, I think we were both kind of like, I want to say cautiously optimistic, because I think most of the things that we find annoying about Moffat largely stem from his job as a showrunner.
Yeah, both in the sense of his larger, I think some of his story arcs and even his impact on individual episodes that he's written in his showrunning era.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and certainly the previews of this episode made it look like it was going to be something pretty special.
Mm,
And I think we can both safely say that it absolutely was.
yeah. This was brilliant. I think maybe the best episode of the RTD2 era so far. Um, I do think
I
I think it might be slightly better than Wild Blue Yonder. Um,
I would have to watch both episodes to figure that
mm,
out. It's definitely right up there.
yeah, because Wild Blue Yonder is great, but this story somehow, as wacky as Wild Blue Yonder was, this story felt more ambitious to me, and pretty successfully so,
Yeah,
which is rare, I think.
it's got all of the qualities of a really good story that usually go hand in hand with like universal acclaim. One of the
Yeah.
things about it that I admire so much is that it is the kind of concept that you can only do once
Mm,
in a Doctor Who episode. You can never replicate this formula again.
yeah.
And all of my favorite stories have that quality. Human Nature is like that. Heaven Sent is like that. And Boom is also like that. It's
Yeah.
and also they know that it's a story they can only do once, and so they really put quite a lot of thought into the pacing and the narrative and the scripting and the dialogue and all of it, and it all just comes together so well to create genuinely one of the tensest 40 minutes of TV that I've watched in a long time.
Yeah, the tension is pretty agonizing, but in a wonderful way. Um, it's interesting, and I've said this before. I think we've probably both said this before. Moffat is a very concept-heavy writer. Um, when you look at um, I think most of the scripts that he's written, whether it's gas mask zombies or multi time era romance in space with Girl in the Fireplace, um, there's there's a focus on the concept as, if not the most important thing, then the hook, right? The selling point. Um, and I think that approach can have its drawbacks if it's not done well. And I don't mean like with Moffat specifically. I mean just generally. I think as a writer, you can get so in love with a concept that you sort of just get carried away with it.
Yeah.
Um, and it can make elements of the story suffer because of it. Um, Thankfully, however, that is not the case in this story, and it's really wonderful to see how Moffat, on one hand, really emphasizes this concept because he, as you've sort of hinted at, he's basically milks it for all it's worth. But it doesn't interfere with any of the other storytelling elements. It's very cohesive. When it would have been very easy to either make the concept, grow stale very quickly, not sort of placing enough attention on it, or making all the other elements suffer because we've got to have this element of the Doctor standing on a landmine for nearly 40 minutes. Um, so the fact that you know Moffat to sort of had his cake and ate it too is really impressive.
And Moffat having his cake and eating it too is one of my criticisms of his run, but here it actually really works out quite well.
Mm.
Um, I'm I'm really, before we get into the nitty gritty, I'm really surprised that this story was written so early in a Doctor's run.
Yeah,
I would normally
I wrote it
expect a
down in my
story
notes.
like
I was
this.
mm.
Well, I would normally
Sorry, go ahead.
expect a story like this to be like second or third season when a Doctor has firmly established themselves in the role, and because it's a really like it's a deceptively strong performance from Shitty Gardwell. Like he doesn't have much to do, but like his expressions and his demeanor and his the whole atmosphere surrounding the performance is genuinely brilliant. And I compare it to, like, you would not give Heaven Sent to a Doctor when they haven't established themselves in the role yet. So the
No,
fact
no,
that
that's an end of season thing,
yeah,
right?
yeah, so the fact that they gave him this in his first season, and I think
Only
this
and like
was
episode 4 of the season even.
well,
It's like
yeah, and I'm trying to I'm gonna find out now when this was filmed in the production cycle,
mm,
but like, good God, this was okay. This was the fifth episode they filmed with
mm,
Judy Garbois, so that's still very early.
yeah.
It
Um
just shows that like they really trusted the caliber of actor that Judy is to be able to pull this off, and good God, he
yeah.
did.
And there are a couple of moments where the combination of Moffat's writing and Ncuti Gatwa's performance are really they're a tour de force,
Hmm.
really. I remember that bit where when he's having one of his little classic Moffat, doctor rambling sort of moments where he's talking about, oh, can you write a diary with the drum? And then Ncuti Gatwa sort of pretends to do sort of a drum beat. That scene, that dialogue, and that performance, no, neither of those would work without the other. And the fact that they're together in that moment makes it really brilliant. Um, it's yeah, it's just great.
Um, before we get too off the rails,
Mm.
uh, let's talk about the world that this story
Yeah, yeah.
presents.
Yeah, because the
Um,
world building's pretty, even for Doctor Who, it's actually really important for this story.
yeah, and right off the bat, I have seen not necessarily a criticism, but I think something that some people have noted about this episode is, oh, it's another anti-war episode. Which, I mean, to be fair, still incredibly relevant, still incredibly important to drive that message home in this show. But like, I don't care if it's another anti-war episode. It's a very, very unique anti-war episode.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and the fact is that theme, like anti-war, that runs all throughout Doctor Who. I mean, it's there with the Third Doctor and stories like the Doctor Who and the Silurians and um, Planet of the Daleks. It's throughout everywhere, really. Like it's that firm, um, almost grim sort of pacifism, sort of realizing this is the cost of war. So, um, as you say, like if it's not a criticism, sure, but like it shouldn't be a criticism because like it's firmly established. But even the fact that it's not new isn't a problem because it's a very important theme. And given that it's been explored so many times in the show, it's actually really interesting to see how each new, writer or generation handles it. Um, because I think it's a surprisingly rich theme, as is proven in this story.
Well, it's also a an example of something I don't think we get very much of in anti-war stories, where it's a very heavy anti-capitalist message as well, and the blending of those two themes is actually done a lot better than oftentimes it has been in the past. I know it's not something like it. It comes up in Davros, the audio drama, and it comes up
Yeah,
really well there as well. But in
yeah,
terms of TV stories, they usually tend to stick with one or the other.
yeah. Um, and yeah, you're right. It's that amalgamation that's even like on principle, it's very bold, I think.
Hmm. Yeah.
Because it's, as you say, it's not done often, but the fact that it works together so well, is the really, really exciting part. Um, uh, yeah, I guess we're gonna do this. I did see that meme that you shared with me and Sam the other day. God, that was funny. It was for the audience listening. It was two pictures. No, sorry, Sam was the first one to share it,
Yes.
and then you altered it a little bit. It was the first picture was of the 13th Doctor, and next to it was like the the system is broken and it needs to be fixed, and then below that was an image of Shruti Gatwa, and next to him was the system is working exactly how it's supposed to be, and it needs to be torn down. And I'm like, man, I've missed this sort of commentary. I really have.
Yeah, it's
Um,
nice to see it done well.
oh, but as you say, like that combination of anti-war and anti-capitalism coming together, um, is a very good thing. And for all my criticisms of Moffat's writing, even uh, you know, his handling of theme, in particular, as I've said, some of the sentimentality, he, I think, at his core, certainly in terms of issues like this, has a really nice, kind of strong sort of leftist vibe, which I really appreciate. It like this is not to knock like Ncuti Gatwa's performance or the way he's been written, but in terms of the themes and the way they're handled, you could see this as if that makes
What,
sense.
sorry? You cut out for the important moment there.
Sorry, yeah. I think you could see this as a Capaldi episode. In terms of the way the themes are handled. Um,
Well, that's really, really astute of you to point out because it's a very similar uh, villain intention, and I do that in air quotes, as the Capaldi episode Oxygen. Do you remember that one?
um, very vaguely. I'm not sure if
It's
I.
workers on a space station, and they have to uh, pay to get like ready oxygen when they're working on the thing, and if
Mm,
the oxygen runs out, the suit kills them, but then the suit just keeps working. while you're in it.
Jesus,
That's
I
essentially
don't think I've the premise rings a bell. I don't think I've seen the episode though.
it's a Capaldi and Bill episode, so it's roughly in
Later.
the middle of season 10,
Mm,
so it's a bit later on.
mm,
That one is also really good in its theming, and it's a little bit different here, where we've got a basically an arms dealing company and a
mm.
weapons dealing company monopolizing a war essentially, and also manufacturing one in order to keep profits high. And
Yeah.
like that's just a beautiful amalgamation. Like I said, it just fits together like a glove essentially. You
Mm,
know, like the futility of war, boom, you've got it. The heartlessness of capitalism, boom, you've got it. And it's
yeah.
also a high concept sci-fi thing where you've got these ambulances going around assessing battle readiness, and if it decides that your life is not as valuable as the amount it would cost to keep you going, then it just
Then you're
kills you.
gone. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect blend. It's just
Mm.
God, like this is why I'm excited that these two writers are back in again, RTD and Moffat.
Yeah.
You know,
I
like
agree.
when especially when RTD was announced, I know there were some people who were like, I don't know about this," and there are some people who for some reason are still like that. But the fact that they are
Mm.
back and they chose to come back means that they have ideas, and we're
Yeah.
seeing them, and they're glorious.
Yeah. It's yeah, it's very clear that I mean it's true with both, but with Moffat, like there's no way that he would come back to the show if he didn't really think he had more stories to tell.
Yeah.
Um, and that's true here because this is I want to say like it's the most original idea we've had on the show in a long time, but then again, like over this season and even with the 60th anniversary specials, it got pretty unique and wacky, but it's
Yeah.
um still a very unique concept, and also the way the story turns out is very like quite unique. You know, you got the classic Moffat twists here, but as opposed to some other examples in his run, God, these feel great. Like the twists are just so good. They they feel earned, and by the way, I'm going to be coming back to that word a lot during this
Mhm.
review. Yeah, they feel earned. They feel incredibly tense and really shocking. Um, I got the bit where and I know I'm maybe getting a bit ahead of myself, but the bit where Ruby gets shot, and
Yeah.
also the lead up to that, you know, the fact that you can almost see the dominoes falling. Um, again, classic Moffat moment, but that really shocked me. I got that, you know, that sort of explodey feeling in my chest. I'm like, yeah, man, we're back. It's just, it's great. It's
Yeah.
so great.
Um, touching back on the tension that runs throughout really the majority of this story. Um, and I've seen a lot of people say online that this is like a return for Doctor Who. Like a lot of people are really enjoying this story, and rightly so.
Yeah,
But I think in the process, they are kind of diminishing what we've already gotten. Because I think a lot of people are saying this is
yeah,
what I've been looking for in Doctor Who, and like it's okay to prefer when Doctor Who gets a bit more serious, like this story. And good
yeah,
God, this gets serious.
yeah.
But to say that this is what the show should be, I
Well,
think is
that,
a bit disingenuous because it's what the show
mm,
can be, but the show needs that blend. You can't have this tone all the time because if
yeah,
you did, it wouldn't hit nearly as hard.
yeah. It's I've said it before. It's that careful balance.
Yeah,
Certainly, having yeah, as you say, like having this tone too frequently would sort of
yeah,
spoil the recipe.
yeah,
I
exactly.
mean,
And I
even if
think
you
to
go back,
call.
sorry, go
Sorry,
ahead.
go ahead. You go.
No. I mean, if you even if you go back, I think I mentioned this, but I watched an interview with hope I'm getting his name right, Sidney Newman, one of the original producers,
Yeah,
but he said that Doctor Who was meant to have that combination of silliness, but also that sort of moral seriousness.
yeah,
And it's about getting that balance,
mm,
especially in like mainline, like main world Doctor Who. It's the reason why, um, you know, if you look at a story like even Davros, the audio story that we looked at, that's still got some lighthearted elements to it, even if it is a bit dark. But then if you go to I, Davros, that story's just dark all the time.
Mm.
And it's a good story, but you wouldn't want that, every week, especially not in mainline Doctor Who. So,
Yeah, I mean, and
um,
also like Space Babies as an example clearly leans into the sillier side, but I
yeah,
think a
for
lot
sure.
of people are overlooking the depth of moral seriousness that is in that story
Yeah,
because it is a very on the surface example of, oh look, it's just a bit silly and goofy and wacky.
yeah.
A
Yeah,
lot of
haha,
people,
sci-fi
yeah,
romp.
people have been discounting that. And look, again, it's okay if you prefer Boom to Space Babies. I'd
Yeah,
prefer Boom to Space Babies, but that doesn't automatically make Space Babies bad. I think that's the point I'm trying to get at here.
yeah, no, for sure. The um part of the unique joy of Doctor Who and being a Doctor Who fan is seeing the breadth of
Yeah.
tone and theme that is tackled throughout, and this runs throughout the series.
Mm.
So that you like you can watch a story like, God, I don't know, The Chase, and then, if you're so inclined, you can then go and watch like something like The Curse of Fenric, and you can still say, "Yep, those both took place in the same universe," and that makes complete sense. Um, I know, I hope that didn't sound too snide, but you know what I mean.
Well,
Like,
not at all. Yeah.
there, that's the joy of the show, that it
Yes.
can teeter from one to the other, and even within the same episode, and even with the same moment, it's
Mm.
the in that sense, the tone is in a lot of ways sort of linked with theme, but also with the characterization of the Doctor, in the sense that he can be, absolutely a goof. We know
Hmm.
this for a fact, but we know that there's that deep moral seriousness, and that's run throughout the whole thing. Um, so to say that um, we should totally discount one element and only focus on the other, I think is, yeah, it is a bit disingenuous. And yes, as I'm sure you and perhaps the audience have guessed by now, yeah, generally I think I prefer a bit of the, darker, edgier stuff. That's just, I don't know if I'd say that's innately part of my nature, but certainly at this point in my life, yeah, I tend to go for gritty realism and harsh realities. But the fact is that the goofiness is a core part of it, and you really can't separate them. Um, Certainly not
Well,
totally.
Colin
Um,
Baker's first era or season could very easily be described as edgy. Like it's got that, like, but it's a cynical side of edgy, and I think
yeah.
that if you were edgy all the time, it would definitely lean that way.
Also, and I get that, in some cases, it's there's maybe a bit of irony here, but even the stories that we've looked at with Colin Baker, there are elements of those stories that are goofy as shit.
Yeah.
Um, Again, as you say, there's kind of a cynicism to them. Even some of the goofier elements in Revelation of the Daleks, I said, have an almost Clockwork Orange vibe to them, but the silliness is still there. It's still a core part of it, and getting that balance right and seeing what you can do with the balance and seeing the new, I guess, combinations is really important. And you need to sort of accept both. You even see this in the giggle, right? Because there are a
Yeah.
lot of concepts in that story that are ridiculous, but also that story was the most scared I'd been watching a Doctor Who episode in years. There are
Mm.
some really frightening scenes in that story, um, and they're almost frightening because of how absurd they are.
Yes.
So to say that in terms of concept and tone that we should just do away with silly sci-fi romps, it's just not true.
Mm.
I don't
And
think.
going back to the fear,
Mm.
that's something that I've mentioned it already with the tension, but it's something this episode does really well. Is that it genuinely gets you to actively fear for the safety of both the Doctor and Ruby, when even in the back of your mind you know they're both living to the next episode.
Yeah,
That's the miracle of this story, is that at parts you're like, oh god, what's going to happen to them?
yeah,
When you
because it's
know the outcome.
yeah, but it's the weirdest thing, and maybe it's just part of the show in general, and maybe the time travel thing has got something to do with it. But yeah, you know what's gonna happen. You know that there's gonna be if not a full blown happy ending, that at least these two are going to be okay. But the very nature of the show is, yeah, but like you don't know how they're going to be okay. You don't know whether the Doctor's going to have to like break the laws of time, or whether someone's going to have to make some big sacrifice play. It's just it's so strange, but so brilliant in the way it works. And it got to the point where I checked the timestamps of it when I was watching it. I'm like, okay, well, how much have we got left? Because we've had a lot of twists already. I had like 10 minutes left, and I'm like, like even then, like for those last 10 minutes, it kept me guessing almost to the very end until we got to the
Yeah.
the sort of pleasant denouement. Um, Before that point, it was really, yeah, where the fuck is this story going to go from
Yeah,
here?
well, it all starts with that first incredible sequence where the Doctor is trying to level out parts of their body so they can lower their foot, and it's
Mm,
like, the pass me that thing so I can offset the balance, and Ruby
mm,
saying it's better odds if I just hand it to you.
yeah,
That whole sequence is so brilliant from a Doctor companion standpoint. Like it's a perfect encapsulation of that dynamic where it's like the companion wants to help, the
yeah,
Doctor doesn't want to put him in danger. That is just a pure distillation of what that dynamic is.
yeah. It's fantastic. I want to go back a little bit though, because we will talk about that dynamic, to be sure. But even just the opening,
Oh
classic
yeah.
Moffat stuff. Heavy emphasis on the ensemble cast. Um, really good characterization. I think the only flaw I had, and this is like one of the only two flaws I had in the episode overall. There's like one line where Mundy's saying, "Oh, because of the romantic tension," and I'm like, I understand why that's there, and I understand there is, a level of irony because it's like it's displaying how nervous she is. I personally could do without that line simply because moments later we get Splice saying, "Oh, he likes you clearly." So, and there's also other bits of context to tell us, okay, there's clearly some sort of romantic thing going on here. So that line I could probably do without, but beyond that, really great characterizations, really strong, and doing it in a way like with a wonderful less is more approach. Like
Mm.
the dynamic between Splice and Vader, it's so clear and it's done so simply.
Yeah.
Um,
Like it's a really effective early conversation
yeah,
that they have on the phone. It's another thing of like, because at the start you're assuming that that's only there to like, you know make his inevitable death all the sadder. But
yeah,
like the fact that it actively has a role in the story is also just another quintessential Moffat thing of like,
yeah,
the whole full circle narrative, tying all the, like, leaving no thread loose,
yeah. I
which
think
he
it.
does so well.
Yeah, I think in the hands of other writers, it would have been tempting just to leave that relationship as a small part at the beginning, just as a world building thing, and that's something we've seen throughout Doctor Who, even in the classic series.
Yeah.
But Moffat, he and I don't know, you can probably speak to this better than I, but I think even in other episodes, but especially here, like none of the characters are really disposable. They have really strong connections that tie into the plot later on. But it's really really powerful stuff. There's something else I want to bring up, and we'll go into this in a little bit more depth. Um, but it's one of those things, and for someone like me, it works to varying degrees depending on what Moffat's story we're looking at. But Moffat is a writer who he's an auteur, I think, in a lot of ways. Like when you watch a Moffat story, you're like, yep, it's a Moffat story. There's those bits. Um, One of the things that I think Moffat does quite a lot, he uses repetition in dialogue very
Yes. Yes, he
frequently.
does. Yeah.
And I know that's a fairly common motif in a lot of writing, but with Moffat, he really does use it quite a lot. Um, that again, it varies in effectiveness for me. Sometimes I find it to be a little bit, actually not even a little bit, but quite trite and frustrating. But at its best, it's really brilliant, and this story is one of the brilliant examples. Both
Yeah.
in like the fact that you have the characters, even like within the episode, they have kind of catchphrases. You've got Vader saying "kiss kiss." You've got the ambulance saying things like "sharp scratch," which, when I heard that phrase, I'm like, oh, that's a Vashta Narada moment. That's a, hey, who turned out the lights sort of a
Yeah.
deal. That's an are you my mummy sort of deal. Um,
Yep.
and you see them and it's like, yeah, that's Moffat. He's back, but it's used in such a brilliant way. There's an understatement, I think, to them that works brilliantly. And even if you just going back to Vader with that phrase "kiss kiss," there are so many sort of Moffatisms in that phrase. It's the repetition. It's the catchphrase. There's the clear sentimentality, but none of it feels overdone. All of it feels again earned, and because of that, it's really quite magical.
It's a
I
rare
think.
use of Moffat using repetition for not a fear factor. He normally likes to do it to be unsettling, to drive up
Yeah,
the foreign nature of the threat.
yeah,
Perfect example is "Hey, who turned out the lights?" and all the
yeah.
dialogue surrounding that. It's normally, and it's used oftentimes in this for fear and tension with the ambulance droid repetition as they get
Yeah,
closer. It's a
like
clear
the
example.
monsters will have that catchphrase often in
Yeah,
Moffat's story.
yeah, but I think Kiss Kiss is used really effectively to
Yeah,
like drive home the familial narrative that is being
yeah, for sure.
woven throughout the story.
Yeah, the parent-child relationship, it's a key theme, I think.
Mm, yes.
And that phrase again, it's so simple, it's so effective, um, and again, it's just sort of bristling with emotion, but it just feels right. It's just great. Um,
Well, speaking of
so
the
yeah.
ambulance really quickly, this is the most overt use of the woman in any of these
Yeah, Susan
stories so
Twist.
far.
Yeah, yeah,
We have
yeah.
learned her name since the last recording. The actor's name is Susan Twist. There's always a twist at the end.
Mm.
Um, it's
I
and we
really
do
hope that's a pseudonym for like as a almost a publicity stunt. I doubt it,
maybe. I
but God, I
mean,
hope it is.
I presume that like when we get a big reveal of her character, we'll learn a lot more about her as a person because like she's been uncredited for all of these episodes. She's got no like IMDb to speak
Yeah,
of. We just don't
that's
know who she is.
ooh, yeah, that's interesting that's happened like that. And I think I hinted to you. It's like, what if she is Susan, and that's why she's called Susan Twist? I doubt it, but
Very much doubt it. Like I said, if they're
uh,
going to bring Susan back, it better be Carol Ann Ford.
yeah, it should be. And it's one of those things where that sort of prediction, it's so ridiculous that if
Yeah,
that's true, I'm gonna laugh my ass off. But like,
and there's so many like why would Susan's image be the interface for these ambulance droids? Did she sell
yeah,
her likeness?
yeah,
That
there's
doesn't
it's
sound like her.
yeah, that'd be like even for RTD and his sort of puzzle box mentality that he takes to his storytelling, that would be strange even for him.
Yeah.
It wouldn't make a lot of sense. Anyway, but yes, Susan Twist is back as the terrifying robot ambulance thing, and it's great.
Um, we also, speaking of casting as well,
Mm,
we have one of our uh, Anglican Marines in Mundy Flynn, who
mm-hmm,
is played by Verada Sethu,
mm-hmm,
who prior to this episode was announced that she's the actor who is joining the TARDIS crew next season as an additional companion to Ncuti Gatwa.
mm,
Um, I think it's still a little bit nebulous whether or not she's playing Mundy or a completely different character. I think it's leaning more towards that she's playing someone new at this point.
right.
Russell had put out a press statement saying, "Welcome, Verada, to the
Mm,
Doctor Who universe. Our time with Mundy is ending, but you'll see what we do with her next season," which seems to imply
yeah,
that it is a new character. But I don't think it necessarily means that there won't be some kind of connection.
yeah. Maybe even in a Martha and her cousin kind of way.
Could
In
be. It could also be a very very distant ancestor.
yeah,
Um, I
it's
don't
Doctor Who. It
think
could
they're
it could
gonna.
be almost anything.
I doubt they're gonna do a Clara situation again, where it's because if you think about if it's another Clara situation, then it's Clara popping up in different places all over history, Susan Twist popping up in different places all over history. potentially Mrs. Flood doing the same thing, and
Mm.
with Mundy or whoever she ends up being doing the same thing. I think it would be a hat in a hat kind of situation. So I don't
Yeah.
think that's going to be the case. But like, if this is a first taste, like Mundy as a character, putting the characters aside for a second, I really like this performance. It's like it really gets across a bunch of the different layers that Mundy clearly has just brimming under the surface. She's a bit of a like when things are when the when during downtime she's relaxed and a joker, but then when things get serious, she does get serious, and
Yeah,
she's
she's got a lot of
yeah.
layers to her. I mean,
Mm,
you get that sense that she's got that strong sense of duty, as I guess is expected of a soldier, but um,
yeah,
there's almost a hesitancy. I think she winds up realizing the truth of the situation surprisingly quickly. I don't know, I guess thinks critically quite well, and she's
yeah,
also got that underlying sense of compassion, which shows up particularly in the end. Um,
yeah.
there's a lot of humanity to the character, and the performance is also really, really wonderful.
I
Um,
also just want to quickly point out that if Mundy is a companion in the future, I don't think it's going to happen, but if it does, it will have been the second time that a character was introduced in a Moffat story to become a companion later on. Obviously, Captain Jack was the same. It'll be a slightly different situation because
mm,
with Captain Jack, it was almost certainly planned in advance, whereas in this case, it reads a lot more like a Freema Agyeman situation where
mm,
they had the actor on set and everyone loved her, so they wrote a role for her in the next season.
yep, yeah.
But
But
talking
either way,
about
I'm
the
keen for that.
Yep, and talking about Mundy and her squad, I mentioned this to you the other day, but it's not the first time that in Doctor Who the Faith has been the army. It's a
Mm,
concept that was first introduced by Steven Moffat in the two-part story, The Time of Angels and Flesh and Stone.
mm,
That whole crew that the Doctor was palling around with in that, protecting from the angels, they were
mm.
also Anglican Marines. I'm fairly certain they were Anglican anyway. They might not be, but they were
Wouldn't
they
surprise
were
me if they were.
religious. They were religious soldiers at the very least.
Mm,
Um, and it's something that Moffat adores doing, which is bringing back concepts. It is in fact the exact same church from uh,
on the Angels of
well, he's
Exodus.
brought them back three times actually. It was
Right.
no, sorry, my mistake. It's not the same church. This
Huh.
is the church that was stationed at Demon's Run when they had kidnapped Amy and her baby in A Good Man Goes to War. This is the same church.
Right.
So it's the same century as well. This story takes place in the same century as A Good Man Goes to War, which is interesting. But obviously, it's building on the stuff from A Time of Angels when the church was the army,
Mm,
which is also a nice little bit of like commentary there as well. In fact, the Doctor has a line in this where it's like, for most of your history, the church is the army. You're just living in a blip. Which,
mm.
man, that's just amazing commentary right there.
Yeah. And I actually thought, when he said that, because I wasn't aware of that world building, I thought he was more referring to like the Crusades or something like that.
Yeah,
Um, but either way, it still works.
yeah,
And it's also great that he's sort of Moffat's bringing in that world building um into the situation.
and it's also an extra little piece of social commentary that is sprinkled in, which is the whole faith uh,
Mm,
situation, which
mm.
does get a bit of a thrashing from the Doctor
Oh yeah,
throughout the story, and it's something
yeah,
that I could easily see myself. I could easily see the online discourse after that with people going, "Oh, Doctor Who's getting political again. Stay out of my religion." I
yeah.
don't think I've
Again,
seen it. I haven't seen anything like that. Again, I might not be in the right echo chambers
mm,
for that. But I do like how they sort of put a bubble on it at the end and be like, faith isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just the application that is oftentimes bad.
mm, mm,
Because I think the Doctor's main issue with Faith, as presented in this story, is that it's Faith actively getting in the way of doing the right thing and saving lives. But at the end
Yeah.
of the story, Faith regarding one day I'll see my dead dad again, he's not going to take that away from Splice because he's like, okay,
Yeah.
that's a really nice positive outlook to have.
Yeah.
Good for you, Splice.
Yeah. This isn't like an episode of House or something.
Yeah.
Um.
Or
Yeah.
Family Guy with Brian the dog, the atheist dog.
Yeah. No, it's doing something different, and I think not just that he had sort of the religious critique, but that he sort of reined it in, I guess, a little bit. Um, that was bold. I
Yeah.
think I admire that he did it, and again, like as I said earlier, this is another instance of somehow Moffat managing to kind of have his cake and eat it too. I
Yep.
don't know quite how he pulled that off, but it's quite astonishing that he did, and it feels. I don't know whether this is just a personal thing, but for me, it feels right for Doctor Who.
Yeah.
I don't have any like just truly concrete evidence to support that claim, but it just having that firm critique of you know, faith or certainly organized religion, and as you say, the application of faith, you know, in favor of I suppose consistent critical thinking, that seems right. But that sense of compassion and realizing that, okay, well, maybe um, my worldview, yes, I believe it, and I will believe it until otherwise proven, but maybe my worldview isn't the only worldview. That still feels right to Doctor Who. And the fact that Moffat, again, has not only really boldly uh, attempted to do this, but has succeeded is, and I think he definitely
Yeah.
deserves all props for that.
Completely. Yeah.
Mm,
Um, it's also like deceptively strong Ruby episode as well. Like we're seeing a lot more of her
mm, mm,
unique qualities coming out. My favorite moment is when she grabs the gun and starts firing into the air, yelling combat situation or whatever it is.
yeah.
It took me right back to banging on the pipes, screaming at the top of her lungs for the bogeyman in Space
Yeah.
Babies. And it's like,
Mm,
okay, we're starting to see more of what makes Ruby unique. Because I think
yeah.
a long time after Church on Ruby Road, a lot of people were comparing her to Rose. I thought, it is again. Look, again, disingenuously, I pointed out in Church of Ruby Road, there's heaps of differences between them. Ruby's typically more optimistic, and Rose is typically more pessimistic, as an
Mm,
example. But here we're seeing like examples of Ruby, like we're seeing her a keenness to help in
mm,
getting in putting herself in harm's way to give the doctor the canister, but also this like really like straightforward, pragmatic approach where it's like, oh, this is how the ambulances work. Okay, cool. Bang, bang, bang. I'm helping. Bang, bang, bang. This is the most like
yeah.
no, not going to put too much thought into this in a good way. You know, get the thing done, and that's a really, really unique mentality. Normally, a companion will like, at the very least, be like, I'm going to do this, doctor. Cool. And if the doctor says no, they'll oftentimes go, well, too bad. I'm doing it anyway. But this is a situation where they're not even really asking for permission.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think I mentioned in uh, it was either The Devil's Court or Space Babies, where I said one of the issues I had with both Ruby and the Doctor's characterizations was they seem very similar, and I wondered, you know, what is that going to say about their character development, you know, here on out.
Yeah.
Um, but in a way, and this is kind of true, I guess, in the other episodes, but especially in this one. Um, Ruby's characterization, yeah, there are similarities to the Doctor in that not only is Ruby quite bold and takes a lot of risks, which the Doctor tends to do, but she's also got she's really quick-witted, right? She can think really quickly. She can um, she's kind of that kind of middle ground of learning by doing, but also like really learning while doing, right? So she can. So the fact that she figures all this stuff out as quickly as she does shows that she's got a really sharp mind. Um, so there's a similarity there, but also it's emphasized. You know, this is a 19-year-old who maybe is a bit more naive than the Doctor is, but that like it's both similar enough but different enough to work. Um, and in this episode, that's emphasized enough so that I can see, oh, they're actually like the differences are fundamental and are important, I think. And I'll actually be very keen to see where that goes from here. Um,
Yeah,
mm,
yeah, completely. And it's also not a Clara situation either. With Clara, by the end of her narrative, it was about how she was becoming too much like the Doctor in her risk taking,
mm,
and this really doesn't have that vibe. I've already mentioned I really appreciate how this episode handles tension, but something I haven't
mm,
touched on yet is just the sheer magic act that is the cold open is the Doctor steps on a landmine.
mm.
And still, even with that, on like two or three different situations, they still find ways of raising the stakes.
Yeah.
You would think that, like, oh, the Doctor's on a landmine, that's about as high as the stakes can get. But then we get, no, as it turns out, the way that these bombs work is that they sort of turn you into the bomb, and the Doctor's chemical makeup is going to blow up half the planet.
Mm,
Then we have Ruby's been shot and requires immediate medical attention, which is only making the Doctor's heart rate and like adrenaline even worse, which is causing the bomb to go off faster. Like, good, it's just like I said, it's a magic act. I don't know how they did
mm,
it.
mm. Yeah, it's really quite staggering. And then you've even got some tensions with Splice and
Mm,
Veta, like they're trying to, I don't know, protect her from realizing the horror of what's happening. And that like that's going on in the background, but it's still potent enough that it sort of sticks in your mind.
yeah,
Like, and all these things are happening essentially at once. Um, certainly after a certain point in the narrative. And the fact that they all fit together, as cohesively as they do, um, is pretty staggering.
yeah.
Let's be honest. Um, Another thing, and we sort of touched on this earlier, but scary ambulances, again, another classic Moffat moment of him taking something relatively
Oh yeah.
ordinary or
Mm-hmm.
safe and turning it into something absolutely chilling.
100%.
Um,
Yeah.
and it's really brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, again, like I've said that he's a very concept heavy writer, and that certainly comes to light in the way he conceptualizes his monsters. But this is still really like, even by those sort of high-minded standards, this is still really great and chilling. Now, do I think it is quite as iconic as the Vashnarada, Weeping Angels, or Gas Mask Zombies? No, maybe not,
No,
but
no,
it's
of course not.
still really, really good. And not least of all because it's not just like a random threat. It doesn't just sort of arrive. It's really part of the world building,
Yeah,
um, and helps thematically, right? Because it's like the real villain in this story. It's not any one individual person. It's not some scary bad guy coming after the heroes. Um, it's the institution of the military industrial complex itself, epitomized by these not so faceless machines. Let's put it that way.
yeah,
And it's
brilliant.
just great. It's
It's
so
so good.
great.
Yeah. Um, I think this brings us neatly to the ending of the episode, where the
Mm,
Doctor basically turns Vader's AI hologram into a virus that infects all of the system and the ambulances to shut down and revive Ruby essentially, and doing so like but essentially surrenders. That's what he gets
mm,
Vader's AI to do.
mm,
And it's all done out of a lingering fatherly bond with Splice that
yep.
even
That the
though
AI
the
has sort of
yeah
replicated.
yeah exactly yeah it's the AI piggybacking off of Vader's strong bond with his daughter,
Yeah.
and intensifying those feelings unwillingly against the approval of the company
Yeah.
to surrender the war and halt all weapons and ambulance drones. It's a really neat way to end the episode. I do think it happens a bit too fast, but
Mm.
it is set up reasonably well throughout. Like they establish early enough what the solution is. Then they
Mm.
establish that Vader's AI is subject to glitches in the form of his feelings for Splice. And then those two things come together by the end. It works well enough, in my mind,
Yeah, well,
anyway.
that's the thing. I understand what you mean. It is a very, I don't know if I'd say it's like a full-blown rushed situation, but it does happen very quickly.
Yes,
Um, uh, but for me, it really is, I think, justified
me
in the
too.
narrative, and the fact that Moffat's making these very big, broad, sort of sentimental sweeps of emotion, and having them pay off is almost staggering, really, in how well that's executed. Because holy shit, and I think this is true really with Moffat's writing specifically, but even with writing generally, can you imagine how easy it would be to screw that up?
Oh
Because
yeah,
like having it be the emotions be that intense, have them that heightened, but completely like be completely cohesive in the narrative and the world building. Man, that takes a lot, right? And I'm going to say
yeah,
something which, and
completely.
I thought of saying this for a while. I know I criticize Moffat quite a lot on this podcast, and I try my best to be honest on this podcast, and certainly when we get to the Moffat era, I don't doubt that I'm still going to be honest there.
Yeah,
But I really just want to acknowledge something that you, I'm sure, would agree with, Cuff. Writing is really fucking hard.
yeah,
It's really hard. One of the reasons I think, and I'm going to try not to stray on too many tangents here, but one of the reasons I think artists generally, and I guess writers specifically, get annoyed with people, uh, the phenomena of AI art and people sort of dismissing artists is
yeah.
that the biggest thing that artists do is work hard. It
Yes,
takes a lot. It's not just, oh, I've got a really neat idea, I'll get that down. There are so many elements that go into writing a good story. There are so many things that can just screw up that you probably weren't even thinking about. That doing it is really difficult, right? And
yeah,
if you look at well, I know if I look at things like Moffat's writing, or even Baz Luhrmann's movies, as much as I cannot stand those movies, um, they're miracles, really, as the director Paul Thomas Anderson once said. Like it's a miracle that they get made, right? They it the fact that these stories are told kind of at all with
yeah,
any kind of modicum of talent in them is a miraculous thing. And as much as I dislike a lot of the very strange and frustrating uh decisions that Moffat made during his era, at least he made them, right? And at least he put effort into what he was doing. I may not like what it is, but you know what? This it's gonna come round. This is a neat little thing. As the doctor
okay.
says, just because I don't like it doesn't mean I don't need it.
Well, there you go. There you
Um,
go.
yeah. Again, yes, I've definitely got issues with his writing, and I'm not gonna
It's
lie about that. But
it's
yeah,
amazing
it's
that
hard.
it's
It's fucking
amazing that
hard.
I just love the fact that your feelings about Moffat can be best summed up by a quote that is directly attributed to Moffat.
Yeah.
It's just the magic of the man. That's how he works in
Yeah.
mysterious ways.
Yes. Thank you, Moffat, for raining down your blessings upon us. No, but seriously, yeah, like writing's hard, and the fact that Moffat again does these things at all, he should be applauded for doing them. And again, at his best, and this is almost like apart from tiny little flaws here and there, this is basically Moffat at his best. It's magic. It's really, really magical that he can make all of these things work. I've forgotten what my main point there was, but fuck it, because I was going to say that anyway. So yeah,
Yep, cool.
good on him.
Yeah. Um,
Um,
I don't have much more to say. I do want to bring up two
hmm,
criticisms of this story that I've seen online and why I don't think they are valid, really.
hmm.
One is that some people were confused as to why the Doctor didn't just use the sonic screwdriver to disarm the landmine. Um, to that I say, A, it's a good thing that the sonic isn't just used in every single situation. But two, the Doctor needed a counterbalance in order to even lower his leg. Like the amount of shifting that the landmine would detect, getting the sonic screwdriver out of the pocket, it obviously would have set it off.
Yeah, no, they make that pretty clear.
Yep.
I don't quite
It's
understand that
it's it's
criticism.
not even like it's unsaid in the episode, and I don't think it even needs to be said. Like Doctor physically cannot move at any point,
Yeah,
or the landmine detonates. It's pretty obvious.
yeah. It's one of it honestly might be one of the best bottle episodes I think I've
Yeah.
maybe ever seen in almost any TV show.
Wow.
I know that's a bit of a big sweeping statement, but still, impressive stuff.
The
That
other
reminds me.
criticism. Oh, you go first.
Thank you. One thing that I was going to mention earlier, this story, is the best way I can put it is it's a surprisingly cinematic story, and what I mean by that is because of the nature of it, because it's a bottle episode, you could almost think, oh, could you like adapt this to theater? But the problem with that is a lot of the emotions, particularly from the Doctor, are reliant on things like close-ups,
Yeah.
which I don't, and it looked like those tiny little movements in his facial
Musical cues,
expressions.
but also musical cues. And again,
Yeah,
Murray
true.
Gold,
There's that.
fantastic
Yeah.
job.
So I think having it in a TV space, um, let's be honest, like TV and cinema, the
Yeah.
lines between them have been being blurred for years at this point. But in the moving image space, shall we say, um, that's perfect for it. Um, Again, like you say, that this is a sort of story that they can only do once, but they can also only do it in this medium, and that's kind of great. I don't know how intentional that is, but it's wonderful that it happened like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, you were saying another
Yes,
criticism.
there was another criticism that I saw online, and it was that someone was annoyed that the Doctor cried so much. And to that I say, I kind of feel like that's just you. I kind of
I'm
feel like
sorry.
you just kind of being like, "Oh, men shouldn't cry,"
Are you?
or like that really annoys me. It really annoys me. Like even
They
if
weren't.
like
They weren't.
even looking at this from like the most devil's advocate position that I could, there is an argument to be made that the Doctor's been in worse situations than this. Why are they crying about it? And to that I say, well, maybe, but also like the Doctor is someone who's often been characterized as showing visible emotional distress when someone close to them is in immediate danger. And those are typically the situations in which the Doctor was tearing up here. So it's perfectly consistent with the character. At which point, I do kind of feel like what your point is there is men shouldn't cry. To that, I
Yeah.
say, shut the fuck up. We've been addressing this toxic masculinity shit for years and years, and we're just getting past it now. For the love of God, it's not a criticism. It's not a valid criticism, in my opinion, that you saw occasionally a tear run down the Doctor's cheek.
Yeah. That's it's complete nonsense. My advice to people who actually think that, and I know, like, I think you've implied that you can't really tell the exact intention of that sort of comment, but on the off chance that anybody feels like that, my advice is grow up.
Yeah,
How about that?
and
Um,
like in general, I don't think anyone is going to argue that the new RTD stories are beyond criticism. I don't think
yeah,
anyone's going to make that argument. But it does kind of feel like at times that people are really reaching to
yeah,
criticize them.
they're looking for shit to complain about.
Yeah, just actively looking. At which point I would ask you, well, why do you feel like you need to do that? Maybe, and again, like it comes back to that thing we've talked about. Like I don't want to blanket statement say that anyone who dislikes this era is definitely disliking it because of Rossa Davies's politics or the
Mm.
color of Shitty Gutler's skin.
Mm.
But like, it really feels that way sometimes.
Yeah. Like like you want to try and take all criticisms, I guess, in the best faith possible, but
Yeah.
man, sometimes it's hard. It's
Yes.
difficult to do that sometimes because you just, again, like you look at this shit and in an otherwise brilliant episode, and it's such a weird, stupid thing to criticize. You think these,
Yeah.
like, such people, they're just looking for shit to be mad about at this point.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like it's, I mean, I'm sorry. Would you like to go back to the days of Jodie Whittaker's doctor slowly killing a bunch of intelligent spiders inside a room by starving them of oxygen? Is that what you want to go back to,
Mm.
sir or madam or whoever? Because that's not really the world that I think I want to go back to.
No,
Um,
absolutely not.
and like, I'm sorry. Have have these people ever stood on top of a landmine? I
Yeah.
mean,
I think I can pretty much
I
like
mean, I know that that's a bit of a an over
you're
the
not
top thing to
actually
say, but you know what I
you're not
mean.
yeah you're not campaigning for them to go and walk through landmines. You're
No, but
making
like
the
he's on
argument
a
that stand,
landmine, you
you're making
morons.
it's they're standing on a landmine, and I don't neither of us have done so, but I would argue it's maybe in the top 5 most stressful things you could find yourself doing,
Yeah,
like on the planet.
not to mention the fact that the Doctor, has had an issue to varying extents of not showing their emotions maybe when they should have.
Yeah,
I think maybe a little bit in the classic series, but especially in the revival, I think the trauma of the Time War probably, impacted a lot of that. And especially given that this is the, ostensibly therapized Doctor, that would make sense that he's going to show his emotions, and it would also especially make sense given he's standing on top of a fucking landmine. It's not as if this stuff is ridiculous, so, Um, yeah, that criticism is, dumb, and I honestly thought, Cuff, when you said that thing about the sonic screwdriver, I think there was a small part of me by thinking there's no way the criticisms could get any more ridiculous than that, and yet, here we are.
well, it feels like every time a new episode comes out, and this is extending back to the Star Beast, I'll always see like a myriad of people online going, "Well, I'm going to stop watching now. The show is ruined." And then I say, "Well, like for the amount of times I've seen that, there are an awful lot of people that are still watching. Like, it's
Yeah.
okay if what's being put on Doctor Who now doesn't pass your personal, sensibilities. You
Yeah,
are free to stop."
I mean, but that doesn't mean everybody else has to.
Yeah,
It's
and
one of the
also
reasons. Oh, yeah,
I
no, sorry.
also just really enjoy, like, there's so many people that say, for me, Doctor Who ended with Capaldi. And to
Mm,
that I kind of say, well, there are so many episodes from that era and previous that if they were released today, people would be having these exact same criticisms where they'd be looking for
yeah,
stuff to criticize because it's got a leftist message or because it's got inclusivity or because of anything like this. And again,
yeah,
I don't mean to say that all the people saying this don't have legitimate reasons for disliking something.
mm,
Anyone is free to dislike whatever they want, but please, for the love of God, be honest about why you don't like it.
yeah. I, as I said, I essentially stopped watching after a certain point during the Moffat era. I really dislike a lot of elements in that era of the show. It apart from the visceral element of, oh, it just doesn't feel like the same show that I grew up with and loved anymore. There are specific elements in terms of sort of basic writing construction and especially theme that genuinely to this day still bother me. But again, as you say, like at least I'm honest about that, and I'm also honest about the fact that just because it's not for me doesn't mean it's not for anybody else. Um, and I think I pointed this out. Hopefully, I pointed this out near the beginning of this podcast. But if you are a person who only loves, for example, the Moffat era, that doesn't make you any less of a Who fan than I am, right?
Yeah,
I I favor the classic era, generally speaking, over revival era, and definitely over a lot of what was in the Moffat era. But I would never say that I have, a special claim to, this fandom that other people don't. And I think
Yeah.
gatekeeping generally should be discouraged. We should move on from it. Very frustrating that people are, I guess, resentful and mean-spirited enough to say, "Oh, you don't like this, therefore you're not this." It's really, really annoying.
But also
Um,
feeling the need to comment constantly, well, that's it, I'm not watching the show anymore. It's like, okay, do it. But, like, the moment you advertise that, you
mm,
are trying to make a point about something.
yeah,
And that point typically is probably not in favor of either the show's philosophy or, let's face it, the philosophy of the majority of the viewers of this show. Because let's put
yeah.
it in no uncertain words. Like, this show is, at least, like, for a number of years now, bigger than it's ever been.
Oh, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
it's
It's
getting way
huge.
more like more people are talking about it online. Like, I'm seeing way more people discuss what Susan Twist could be than I did see people talking about what the Fugitive Doctor could have been. Um, like Disney Plus has,
Yeah, Disney Plus has got the streaming rights. I mean, what are
yeah,
we?
and say what you will about what that means. It still doesn't mean they have any creative control over the show. But what it
No,
has meant is that the show is more readily available to more people, and
yeah,
you see so many echo chamber YouTube channels like to point out, oh, the overnight viewing figures were the worst they've ever been. The show is tanking, and it's like, well, you're looking at one statistic and not considering the rest of them to suit your own narrative.
yeah, yeah. It's really quite ridiculous, in
Yeah.
my view. Um, so yeah, those criticisms that you mentioned don't make sense as far as
Yep.
I'm concerned.
I have nothing more to say about this story. I think it's brilliant. Do you have anything else you want to point it?
Yeah,
Add in before
a
we?
couple more things. So, as I said, this story is sort of littered with what I call Moffatisms. Um, Most of them are really good. There's a lot of really great lines of dialogue here where Moffat has the Doctor sort of waxing poetic or waxing philosophical about various social issues, but they come out in these really, really brilliant lines like, keeps you dying, keeps you buying,
Yeah.
war is a business and business is booming. It's just, it's really, really great, clever stuff. Or, everywhere is a beach eventually.
Yeah,
Um,
it's really good visual imagery. It's really great.
like you know what I mean? Like this is classic
Yeah.
Moffat stuff.
Yes.
This is, how many seconds in eternity. This is what we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
Um,
Every Christmas is Last Christmas.
and I will say, as a person who has in the past found a lot of frustrations with the more uh I don't know if it's the flowery language that bothers me, but maybe the underlying sentiment um that bothers me, but the sentimentality behind a lot of this sort of wordiness. As someone who has taken issue with it, I didn't really find any issues with it here. Like it's all
No.
completely justified in the narrative. It feels as the word that I've come back to a couple of times, earned. It feels really
Yeah.
earned here.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe because of how desperate and serious the situation is. Um, the thing that I noticed, especially on a second watch, is again there are a lot of Moffatisms that in other Moffat stories have genuinely frustrated me, but here, um, they're just used really wonderfully. As I said, this is why I think this is sort of Moffat is at his best. Another example. There are a lot of instances of the Doctor, going on these weird little funny tangents, and you know the ones that I'm talking about, right? It's like
Yes.
when he'll
Yes.
say, "Oh, like, have you ever done this? Well, I've done this, and I've done it, and here's my weird, wacky sci-fi twist." It's like, "Oh, wait, I'm back in, this point in the conversation." So that happens quite a lot in the story, and in other stories, that has annoyed me. Um, and I'll confess, I can't think of any like immediately specific examples of that, so bear with me. But I feel like when those lines happen in some Moffat episodes, they feel like an attempt to show off or overplay how quirky and weird the Doctor is. And when those lines exist without any other sort of underlying meaning, when they're just there for sort of a basic bit of characterization, I find them really annoying and frustrating. But that's not what we got here, I think. Maybe one line was sort of verging towards that, but generally speaking, all the lines that were like that, where the Doctor was, going on these tangents and being really weird and wacky, there was a lot of layers there, right? Because yes, he's being strange and wacky, and he's demonstrating that, but because he's in the middle, he's standing on a fucking mine. There's a wonderful layer of irony, like he's rationalizing it to himself. I'm pretty sure there are certain moments where he's saying these quirky, weird, funny things, but he's actually crying when he's saying them. There's just
Yeah.
such a potent level of drama, and then there's that bit where Ruby keeps coming forward and saying, "No, I'm going to hand you this thing. Shut the fuck up, Doctor. We're doing this." And then there's what is it? There's that bit where they're just sort of staring at each other, and there's tears in their eyes, and Ruby's like, what does she say? I can't remember, but the Doctor says something like, "Oh, and if I've survived this, I'm gonna be very, very cross with you." Again, classic. Oh, the Doctor's a wacky little dude or wacky little person sort of character, but like, there's more than that, right? There's a real
Yeah.
dramatic potency there, and it's so good. It's so good. Um,
Well,
so
it's using a bit of that like silly levity to ease the tension in the moment to make them a little less stressed about what they're going to do. I think that's what is different about it. In
yeah,
other situations, the Doctor will say something like that just to say it.
yeah, and I think in those situations that does frustrate me. But here, there's so much more going on there.
Yeah, it's not
Um,
just a quip. It's not just a
yeah,
quip here.
yeah, and what a great bit of characterization for both companion and Doctor. Like they're like you know what they're saying even though they're not saying it, right? Like it's
Yeah.
it's that classic example of genuinely good layered dialogue, which is just magic here. Um great stuff. I think there are two other things I want to mention. So as I've said in this podcast and in several others, Moffat has a tendency to put a lot of sentimentality and even sort of a romantic quality to his writing, and by which I mean I don't mean like lovey-dovey romantic. I mean in the style romantic
Yeah.
um, quality to his writing, and in a lot of scenarios that has very much frustrated me. It in terms of how personal I feel. Actually, no, I'm going to rephrase that. So sometimes when it happens, I think for me it does impact like the actual objective quality of the storytelling, but a lot of times it is just more of a personal thing with me. And as to what ratio that is will depend on the episode we're looking at. But as I've said before in the past, yes, just personally, overly excessive sentimentality and sort of overly romanticized thinking
Yeah.
does frustrate me on principle, and it's not just a Moffat thing; it's in other stuff too. And when it's not good, when Moffat does it, and for me it doesn't work, it is so frustrating. I just it's just
Yeah. No, I
it
get it.
really
I get it.
it,
Yeah.
it really gets to me. Like and anyone listening to this podcast, just go and listen to the Girl in the Fireplace. It's all
Mhm.
there. Um, so when those moments show up in this episode, and there are a lot of them, I was not surprised. But what I was surprised by was how well they're working. I think, barring maybe one line, and we'll get to this, but barring one line, all of the sentimentality in this story feels completely earned, to the point that when the Doctor says that, yeah, I've got it written down here. He's like, and an old man once told me what survives of us is love. God, that feels great. That
Yeah.
feels so earned. It feels so right. And in that line on its own, if that was in some other Moffat episode and I've been told that Moffat put that in there and I didn't know what the episode was, I probably would have been um annoyed, like just not knowing what the context is. But in context of this episode, it's so good. It's so great. It's such a really wonderful way to cap off the episode, and it's one of those things where, and I said this in the Girl in the Fireplace, when sentimentality, even if it's very intense, when it's done right, it's the best feeling. It's the best feeling as an audience member, and this is a great example of it. So honestly, Moffat, well done, because Holy shit. That was it was wonderful.
Yep.
And I can't believe how well that worked. Because again, it could have easily gone the other way.
Yeah.
Um
Easily. Yeah.
yeah, so fantastic stuff. So that's one thing. And now we'll get to the basically the biggest criticism I have for this story. Um I said to you, Cuff, there was a line of dialogue that I had an issue with. We were talking privately about this, and I said, "Oh, you could probably guess which one that is. Would you like to take a guess, just for the audience?"
I don't. I don't know in any of the individual lines that well to probably have a accurate guess. So I think I'm gonna not embarrass myself and just forego.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's dying defines us. Snow isn't snow until it falls.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, that
there are
makes
a
a lot of
couple of
sense. Yeah.
yeah, there are a couple of things I want to point out about this. So earlier, no, I've got this line written down too. So slightly earlier, the doctor says, the fact that lives are very short. We don't get a lot of time, in the universe. But then he says it's a good thing too. We got to keep the pace up, otherwise nothing would get done. Now, I was actually surprisingly okay with that line. I think mostly because it emphasizes the um need for purpose in this
Yeah.
life, like
Yeah.
really explicitly emphasizes it.
Yes.
So I can actually appreciate that a little bit. Um, Again, given that he literally says, "Oh, life is short," that's a good thing. I'm surprised how well that whole line works for me. So that's pretty good. But that line, "Dying defines us, snow isn't snow until it falls." I realize this is just a personal thing. I'm fully willing to admit that, but yes, I just on a philosophical level, I have a problem with that messaging, and we've covered this topic even on this podcast before. I
Yeah.
think maybe a little bit with school reunion, but especially with the Cybermen episodes.
Yeah.
Look, if you, Cuff, or anyone in the audience disagrees with me, that's fine. I understand that. But just me personally, as a person who, to put it bluntly, as a person who has nearly died a couple of times in his life, I just don't have the luxury to believe in that sort of philosophy. And if it were up to me, like, I would prefer it if fiction generally sort of moved away from that, or at least tempered that sort of idea, um, rather than having lines like this. And it's funny because for all my problems with Moffat's sentimentality, I don't think I've seen this sort of messaging from him. I mean, you've seen more of the Moffat era than I have, so maybe
Oh
I'm wrong, but um, I
no, I
was
can't say. I can't say it's a thing that's. If it is in an episode, it's in one of his like one-off episodes that doesn't really
mm,
factor into a series arc, so it hasn't really warranted a lot of rewatching. So I can't say this is a common theme with him.
yeah. So even then I was so surprised, but yes, that for me, just personally, I'm like, yeah, I kind of wish sort of fiction would, if not move on from it completely, then maybe temper it a little bit, because it's just not
Sure,
something I
sure,
can
yeah,
really vibe with. And I guess this sort of leads into the scoring. I'm a little bit torn because on one hand, there's nothing really technical I can fault this story on.
yeah,
Um, it's mainly that personal thing, and then, but the thing is, like, I'll go back to um something like The Idiot's Lantern, where I think I made it very clear I had a lot of
yeah,
personal issues
yeah.
with that ending and how
I don't even
fucking
think you
bad
could
it
call
is.
those. I don't think you could call those issues personal at all. I think it's just a bad ending. I think it's
Yeah,
pretty
which
out
is
and out a
true.
bad ending.
It's like because obviously, like, the morality of it is very bad thematically. It's such a failure in that story. It's clearly
Yeah,
promising to do something and doesn't even come close to it in the end because it's so terrible. So yeah, maybe that's more of a technical thing, I guess, or at least maybe more in the middle ground between technical and personal. Um, but I'm also reminded of what you said when we looked at Davros, the audio story. When you said that the difference between a 9 and a 10 is comes to personal stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess we'll go to the scoring now. I'll let you go first.
Yeah, this is an easy 9 for me. And I
Mm.
think what is holding it back from a 10 for me is what you've just hinted at there. It's my personal philosophy where it's like there are no perfect stories. A 10 is just a 9 that hits you personally where you live.
Yeah.
And that didn't quite get there for me.
Mm.
Like it's not a story that like I felt like in my soul as I kept thinking about it.
Yeah.
And there are some Doctor Who stories that are like that for me.
Yeah.
And we haven't encountered any of them yet. But for
Yeah.
me, this is as close to that as I think a Doctor Who story has come in ages.
Sure. Yeah.
It's on a technical level, it's like there are one or two green screen shots that look a little obvious, but apart from that, it looks
Yeah.
amazing as a visual feast. The
Yeah.
story is unique for the show, and it rolls with its premise to several degrees higher than I expected it to.
Yeah.
Acting is fantastic. The characterizations are perfect. The themes are there, and they're explored really well. I have very few criticisms, and and again, it's just the fact that I didn't walk away from this and go, "Wow, like I am changed as a person," and that's a bit extreme, but you know my point.
No, I
That's
know,
what's
I no,
keeping
I
it from a
totally
10 for
what you
me.
mean. Yeah, it's as you say. I actually really like that philosophy of yours, Cuff. The fact that a 10, it's a 9, but it's one that hits you where you live. I actually relate to that quite strongly. Yeah. As you said, though, yeah, easy 9 for me. I think I said to you even a few days ago when we were discussing this. This is at least a 9. Um,
Yeah,
there's nothing. I don't think there's really anything technical I could probably faltered on, even with the fact that the climax and the resolution feels again not rushed, but it happens quickly. It still fits in perfectly with the world and the sense of urgency of the story, which again kind of miraculous that it turned out that
yeah.
way. Performances are absolutely brilliant. Writing is just really stellar. And this is a Moffat story at its best. This is all the elements that make up a Moffat story, but done in the best way possible, I think.
Mhm.
And for me,
And
the only thing, well, kind of like you said, Cuff, like even beyond my personal philosophy of it, I don't know if there's anything like is shattering my mind about what a story or even a Doctor Who story can be. But I think the main criticism for me again is just that personal philosophy thing, which I wish um, I guess fiction would sort of move on from a little bit. So, and I have to, as much as I want to rely just on the technical criticisms, I do have to factor in my gut reaction to it, and because
mhm,
of that, that stops this story from being a 10. But like a strong 9 at the very least.
yeah.
I think.
And it was also another thing, it was completely absent of David Bradley, so you do not get 500,000 points for that prediction.
Damn. Oh
Yeah,
well,
well,
it was worth it because we got this episode.
it was, yeah.
Yeah.
There's no other shake up in the point predictions. We're still sitting at 50 to 500 in your favor at the moment.
Yes, but yeah. Um, Yeah, I mean, we'll see if there's any wacky twists that show up, but
Yep. Well, next
um,
time we have an episode called 73 Yards. Um, I don't know if you saw the next time trailer. It looks to be another pretty high concept episode.
mm,
Um, it looks like we're going to get a pretty decent Ruby focus as well, with the Doctor
mm,
being out of action for quite a long time.
mm,
Um, I'm looking forward to it. It's not what I expected this to be, and it's looking like
mm,
this episode may be the one where we get that shot of the TARDIS on the cliff with all the moss and vines growing over it. It's looking like
mm.
that's probably what it's going to be. It's. I don't think it's intriguing me as much as Boom, but like any episode where the Doctor is out of action and the companion gets a spotlight is always like there's a lot of potential for some really good story possibilities. So I'm
And
excited.
didn't and didn't you say that RTD himself said this is the best, one of the best things he's ever written?
Oh, hang on. Is that this episode or is that a
I think
different one?
I think it is. I think I remember you saying it was 73 yards.
Well, I will double check that. If it is that
Mm,
episode, then I'm definitely looking forward to it, just to see if it lives up to the hype or if it doesn't.
mhm,
Let's have a look. Episodes. I'm on IMDb right now. Let's get to the trivia for 73 yards. What do we got here? Yes, you're correct. This is this is the episode that RTD called one of the greatest things he's ever made in his life.
Mm.
That's
Well, then I'm very excited about
I'm
it.
trying not to overhype myself as a result of that, because we
Yeah,
did just get Boom as a standalone episode, which was glorious. I'm hoping the 73 yards can live up to that expectation, but we'll see.
we'll see. Oh, also one tiny little thing we forgot to mention. When the ambulance is attacking Ruby, we learn that she's like 3,000 years old. So that's
I
interesting.
th- I think that's just because they're in the 51st century and she
Maybe.
was born that many years ago. It's consistent with how the show has done
Mm, yeah.
ages of characters when they're in the future, in the past. It's
Cool.
not something that
At
I think is
True.
a flag of, oh,
True.
hang on a minute, because we see her as a baby in 2004
Yeah, I
at
guess so. I
church.
mean, look, even if it's something like to sort of to throw off the scent, I guess, or to confuse the audience, maybe like I could see it going either way because Doctor Who is just one of those shows. But yeah, if it's just oh yeah, she's in the future, then that could also just make
Mm,
sense.
I think it's just that.
Yeah, and I will say, and I don't want to like jinx myself here or anything. But in terms of 73 yards, let me put it this way. I very rarely cry when I watch a piece of fiction.
Mhm.
Um, if I do out of like emotion, that's a sign that it's like major, like a major like
Yes.
masterpiece.
Yeah.
If I cry at the end by the end of that story, then you and I are gonna have a very good and interesting conversation next week.
Well, that surely can't be setting this episode up for failure, can it? But
Oh, we'll
until
see.
then, I'm Alex.
And I'm pretty excited to be a Who fan right now.
Oh yeah, it's a really great time.